So today let's talk about Jade, aka loves to uppercut, aka nitro kick into your DMs, aka I can throw projectiles but you can't because purple. So today let's talk about how to beat this character because she has been tormenting players in Kombat League for a long time. Just like last video, please request which character you hate the most in the comments section, and without any further ado, let's get right into it. So since we're talking about Jade, it's important to cover her universal things first. So for starters, don't ever do any high attacks in the neutral because this move right here, this thing is super strong, starts up in 9 frames. They never slowed this move down, which blows my mind because there were some DLC characters whose uppercut is just as good in terms of range, but is actually slower to compensate. Not Jade. Her move is still 9 frames while also having crazy good range. And the Jade players know how strong this uppercut is because even when they miss it, they'll sometimes have the nerve to do it again just in case you try to whiff punish it. So my first tip, just don't do high attacks in the neutral ever. Only mids, only lows. Because the last thing you want to happen is accidentally whiff a high attack and then boom, she gets a combo started on you, especially after the update because Jade's combos are even better now. And also of course no jumping in on Jade either, I think that goes without saying. So then the second most annoying thing in Jade's arsenal is her back 2. This thing does decent damage, is very easy to hit confirm, and leads to some decent damage. And since this move hits high, a lot of players advise that you should just duck under it. I don't advise that because the overhead cometh. And if this thing lands in variation 1, it's a 50-50, and then every other variation it's still a combo starter, so I don't recommend crouching when Jade's that close. Instead, I actually recommend trying to block this thing because if you walk within range and then block, or if Jade simply misspaces it, this thing can be punishable at nearly any range aside from max range. So unless she does something like that, where it can be a lot safer, let me go ahead and tell Devore just to block completely. So if this last hit lands by itself, then yeah, it's like -13 and we're all the way over here. Very few characters outside of maybe Sub-Zero with his slide can even punish this thing. And that's why Sub-Zero is actually one of the best counter picks for Jade, by the way. But thankfully, if you're even a bit closer, or if the Jade player just makes a mistake and does this way too close, it's now a guaranteed punish, especially when you're really close. I have punished this so many times even as a Jackie player, and you know Jackie doesn't have any projectiles, she's actually quite stubby. But even so, I find myself punishing this move every single time just because the Jade player misspaces it. So I actually don't recommend ducking this thing most of the time unless the connection is really good, because then it can be a good idea because Jade can actually special cancel this, and that can catch people every now and then. You go to punish too soon, you get nitro kicked, or she just goes for a low, or any number of special moves. So sometimes ducking it can actually be a good idea as long as the connection is solid, because then she can't special cancel. But if the connection is even slightly suspect, then I recommend trying to block this thing instead, because even though her overhead is pretty darn slow, if you do get caught by it, she gets a full combo, so I don't think it's worth it. And you know what, let's talk about the overhead next. So this thing is quite a menace to a lot of players because if it hits you, it launches meterless for a full combo. And once again, after the update, Jade has gotten even more damage on her basic bread and butters. From mid-screen or the corner, she just hurts more in general. Now thankfully, if you're fighting a more casual Jade player, they usually just dial in this whole thing because they think they've nailed the whiff punish, or they just think you'll be crouching, so they press both buttons and then it's -13, so a guaranteed punish once again. In fact, even if she lands this move from really far away, it's still pretty much a guaranteed punish for most characters. Don't get me wrong, your high attack might not reach, but I guarantee your character has a mid or a low string starter that can punish from this far away. Now unfortunately, if you're fighting variation 1, there's a bit of a problem because she has a 50-50. She can go for a low, and that second hit is also an overhead. I'm not sure why, I think NetherRealm's just cruel, but the point is she has either a low that can catch you standing, and if you want to block that by going low, she can get an overhead and then get a full combo. However, thankfully there's actually a bunch of ways to avoid this situation. So the first one is fuzzy guarding. So normally I don't like fuzzy guarding, I don't think it works especially in the neutral, but here it actually does because the overhead is slightly slower than the low special move. So if you block this first overhead, you can actually crouch block immediately and then stand block immediately, and you'll actually cover both situations. If she goes for the low special move, you'll block that. If she doesn't and goes for the overhead, you'll still stand up in time to block that too. Which is good news because both the low and overhead option are completely unsafe on block, which means you get a full combo punish. So that's the first way to avoid that annoying setup, but then solution number 2 is to actually go for a flawless block. Because believe it or not, this thing is not only punishable, but she can't even do the second hit if you flawless block, and she also can't special cancel it either. NetherRealm really wants you to flawless block this move, and you actually can see it coming if you have a trained eye because Jade actually hops in the air a little bit before doing it, And if you do pull off that flawless block, she can't special cancel, so no 50-50, and she can't even do her second overhead, and best of all, she's more punishable than usual. So if you get this timing down, or if you just predict that she's going for the overhead and you flawless block it, she is just gonna get destroyed. And next up, let's talk about her infamous kicks. So her back 3-4-3. Everyone hates this string because it starts up pretty fast, 11 frame mid, not too bad for a zoner, and then she can actually finish it to keep herself +5 on block. At a casual level especially, this thing is just a nightmare because the Jade player can actually see if they get the hit and then go for a special move, and then if it's blocked, they just finish it and press circle one more time, which of course leaves them at +5. So on the surface, this string seems really good. It's a great hit confirm, has fast startup, and Jade has the option to make it safe. Wow, that's really good. But here's a dirty little secret that I'm gonna let you in on. That last hit has a very big flawless block gap. So check it out. I'm gonna tell Jade to do that string, and I'm gonna flawless block it. Boom, not even tough. The key here is to make sure you release block early after that third hit. And once you pull this off, check out how minus Jade is. -10. That is a full combo punish for anybody. You don't even have to spin the meter, no up 2 or up 3 required. You can just do a regular standing combo punish. Now of course, here's the problem. A lot of Jade players, to avoid this situation, will just cancel into her projectiles, and these bad girls are +7 on block. However, here's the thing. These projectiles, they can be ducked, which means if you want a flawless block while also avoiding all of these special move options, just go for a crouching flawless block. So once she starts this string, you want to crouch block. You can start off stand blocking, but then crouch block as she's going, and then release block. If the Jade player goes for these projectiles, they'll fly right over your head, at which point you get a full combo punish or an uppercut crushing blow. Either one is good, but the point is you now cover both options. If she goes for that final hit, then you can flawless block it by releasing block and then pressing block when the kick comes. However, if she goes for the projectiles instead, you're already letting go of block, which means they'll fly right over your head. So it covers both scenarios. And I feel the last thing to talk about with Jade as far as universals go is her 1-2-4, this annoying low that crushing blows when the first attack misses, and once again thanks to the update you get more damage after this. And it seems like, just to be cruel, NetherRealm made this the exact same distance as her overhead, and the startup is also pretty similar as well. So fuzzying doesn't really work here as an option. Instead, you're gonna have to be pretty much reacting to this thing, but honestly, the overhead always combos, whereas this thing only combos once a match. And once she gets that crushing blow, she's gonna stop going for it as often because the damage just isn't worth it anymore. And even if she does keep going for it after landing the crushing blow, I still recommend just taking it, especially if your defense isn't that good. As a player, you don't have very good reactions. I recommend just blocking high most of the time anyway. But much like Liu Kang's crushing blow, I just expect this thing to hit me at least once a match. It's not that big of a deal if it lands. I do recommend you try to react to it, but if your reactions aren't that good and you just admit that, then I recommend blocking high most of the time and just taking this hit. And I actually almost forgot to talk about her blazing nitro kick. Everybody hates this move because it starts up so fast, and I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of moves like this either. I kinda wish NetherRealm hadn't put moves like this in a footsie-based fighting game because it kind of ignores footsies altogether. Online, this thing can be downright unreactable, especially if she's a bit closer at around this distance, and you're already standing because you want to avoid the overhead on reaction, but no, she catches you with this. So how do you go about beating this move? Well, there's a couple of options. The most obvious one is that whenever she's beyond the range of this overhead, just be neutral crouching, especially if you have the life lead because she has to come to you. And sometimes you can trick them by crouching, walking, and then crouching right away, and they'll see that get up and think, oh, I got you, and they'll fly in. And if you avoid this thing, she actually can't amplify it. So check this out. It only amplifies on block or hit. So if you avoid the initial kick because you know the overhead can't reach you, then you get a full combo punish, or an uppercut crushing blow, one of the two. So that's the most obvious solution. However, what if the Jade player is sneaky and makes sure to only do nitro kick when she's within range of the overhead because she knows you're expecting it, so you're standing up, and then when you block it, she goes, oh, I'm going to enhance it. This can be super annoying, especially since the Jade player can delay the amplify quite a lot, and as a result, a lot of players will get used to blocking the amplified version and just think it's coming, and the Jade player goes, nah, I'm not gonna do that, and they get to escape unpunished all the time. Now here's the thing, from what I've heard, it's actually possible to punish as early as possible, and as long as you use the input buffer to your advantage, you actually punish every situation regardless of what the Jade player does. So let's go ahead and test that. I'm gonna amplify right away. And look at that. As long as you punish as soon as possible, you'll actually catch her flying from the other side, and thankfully your character already turns around, so that's very nice. And by the way, this punish is actually a crushing blow for D'Vorah. And then even if the Jade player tries to delay it like we talked about, it's not going to work because they'll just leave a bigger window for your punish. So the key here is to actually go for your fastest punish period immediately, the second after you block this nitro kick, because it should cover every situation. So next up, let's talk about the individual variations. So in my opinion, variation 1 is still one of the most effective ones to use online. It's just so good for internet play. But first up, we have the air Razorang. This thing is annoying because for some reason it's still plus on block. I don't know why a move that avoids pretty much everything while also throwing things gets to be plus, but it is. And the further away she is, the more plus it is, but even like really close, it's still gonna be plus unless she misses. But otherwise it's still completely plus. So unfortunately, if she gets you to block this thing, there's not many options. And if you can't actually hit her before she throws it, there's not many options either. Now here's the good news. A lot of Jade players will be antsy and do this from far away because realistically it covers the entire screen. And they know that. It covers such a large portion of the screen, so they'll jump away and do it. If that's what they normally do, then when they jump backwards, if you have a teleport, I recommend going for it right here and there. So if you're a Scorpion player especially, or even D'Vorah, but typically if a Jade player loves to abuse this move, they jump straight up and do it, or they jump backwards and do it, you have a split second to actually see them jump, and then go for your teleport, and you should punish them for going for this. And even if your teleport doesn't hit them, you should still recover before they actually land, which still means a full combo punish. And then we have the upward Razorang, so this really shouldn't be a problem unless you're jumping, which we talked about at the very start. Just don't jump and this shouldn't be a problem. Now unfortunately, if she lands this, she can actually get a blazing nitro kick, guaranteed. If you're even closer, she can dash forward and get more damage, so just don't jump, especially against variation 1, because this anti-air is no joke. And I also wanted to talk about dodging shadows. I know it's not specific to this variation, but I wanted to cover it. So believe it or not, this does not make Jade immune to all projectiles. Not only is she still vulnerable to a lot of ground pound and other unique ranged attacks of that nature, but even certain regular projectiles can still catch her. So for example, Frost has the down back 2 projectile, that still works. Shang Tsung has the corpse drop. There are plenty of moves that seem like they should lose to this purple, but no, the purple actually loses. So if you really do hate fighting Jade, I recommend going into practice mode and just seeing which moves actually beat purple, because you'd be surprised how many projectiles straight up beat this thing. And now we're on to variation 2. Thankfully there's not too much to cover about this variation, but it's very strong, especially at a higher level. It actually beats variation 1, and the reason why is this pole vault. It may not seem like much, it's only -3, you know, big deal, but here's why it's so good. Even if you flawless block it, it's still -3. Yeah, so you get pretty much no benefit from flawless blocking this thing, which means the Jade player can just end with this, and she's safe. And there's not really a gap there either, so she can just keep going for it over and over again. So punishing her is going to be much tougher in this variation in general. But even though it's not really punishable, don't freak out, it's still -3. And this game has a block buffer, which means if you do a fast mid or a fast low and she tries to challenge you, she will lose every single time. Oh, but then we have perhaps the dirtiest thing about this move, and it's why I love this variation. If she amplifies it, she does a nitro kick, but don't be fooled, it's not punishable like the other nitro kick. It's entirely different. As you can see, it's +3, which means if she's on point with this timing, then you're just stuck. You can't press any buttons or you will get counter hit. But fear not, because the blazing nitro kick is actually a high attack and therefore can be neutral ducked under. So if the Jade player loves to go for this and just abuse those plus frames, you can expect it and just let go of block and duck under it most of the time. The only exception is if they do it as fast as possible, sometimes it does jail. It is possible, but it requires like crazy fast timing, which means most of the time you can just release block and she'll miss, you get a full combo punish or a crushing blow punish. However, unfortunately, the Jade player still has one more option, and that's the cancel. And the cancel does happen pretty quickly. Now, if they're predictable, you can actually interrupt it every single time because she doesn't recover as fast as some characters like say Cabal or Scorpion. And thankfully the neutral duck actually avoids this setup as well, because you're expecting the nitro kick, so you're already neutral ducking, which means she can't throw you. And if you're also neutral ducking and ready to mash uppercut, you'll beat her options as well when she cancels. So don't get me wrong, the cancel can still be very sneaky, especially if the Jade player is mixing up when and where they do it, but thankfully it does have more recovery than some characters, so if you predict it, you can still get a full combo punish. And then last but not least, we have variation 3. I don't think there's actually too much to fear from this variation. Once you learn, there's actually a gap in this string. So that second hit where she swings it really wide, you can actually interrupt that, and the timing's not difficult whatsoever, which means that now the Jade player has to go for riskier stuff, like maybe she goes for the blazing nitro kick, or she goes for just a regular projectile, any number of things, but she now has to do something risky because the gap here is just so big. However, with that said, if she does get you to block the initial hits, she can be very frustrating because she has a low or she has the overhead. And unfortunately, both of these options are safe on block, which is why it's such a strong variation online. So here's what I actually recommend. If your reactions aren't that good and you know that you can't fuzzy guard any of this, I recommend just taking the overhead and actually blocking low for the entire string, because the overhead will actually knock you down, which at the very least gives you options to some wake ups and other ways to escape, maybe a roll, any number of things. However, if the low hits you, it's a restand, and it's plus 16, which means she can guarantee this overhead, she can guarantee this mid, any number of things, and now the shenanigans start all over again, right? She has a mid low, or she has a mid overhead, or she has an overhead low, or she has an overhead. So I recommend if your blocking isn't that good, just take the overhead every single time. Once this first attack comes out, just start blocking low. And if she goes for the low, then you're completely fine, you didn't get hit. But if she goes for the overhead, you get knocked down, and at the very least, you have some wake up options. And then next up, we have the Vanishing Winds. This thing is really strong for being a low because it's only -4, and she can also teleport with it. And the startup is pretty decent, and it's a bit deceptive if you don't know how to look out for it, and perhaps worst of all, it's actually a safe teleport at only -3. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to go ahead and take control of Devora and show you how I actually beat this thing whenever I fight it. So I'm going to tell Jade to teleport. What I do, I jump, and you get a full combo punish every single time. Or if that's too much trouble or a bit too difficult for you, you can just block low because it is -3, which means once again, go for your fastest mid or your fastest low. Don't do a high attack, she may mash uppercut, but if you go for a mid or a low, you'll get either a counter hit or at the very least, you'll take your turn back. And honestly, that's pretty much all there is to cover for the variations. I find what makes Jade actually annoying is her universal kit more than anything. But hopefully now you have a much better idea on how to fight Jade. So please leave a like down below if you enjoyed the video, and as mentioned earlier, please request which character you want to talk about next. And finally, why not keep that combo going by subscribing and ringing that bell? That way you never miss a future video. Make sure to come back next time, and as always, stay underdogs.